the Toronto Star. I'm Saba, and this matters. If you've been feeling sticker shock at the checkout counter lately, you're not alone. Canada is bracing for what experts are calling a perfect storm as inflation hits the food aisles and prices explode. Is a short trip to the grocery store becoming a high-stress situation? Do you find yourself buying a lot less and paying a lot more? Have you started avoiding the meat aisles for fear of the prices and seriously beginning to contemplate a vegan lifestyle? Okay, even if that last one's just me, Canadians are definitely feeling the pinch of skyrocketing food prices due to the terrible impacts of a pandemic-plagued 2 years. And it's not over. We'll all be paying a lot more for food next year, says Canada's latest food price report. We can all expect our groceries to put a big dent in our budget and our yearly income. And yes, the pandemic is to blame, like I said, but there's more. Let's just say it's complicated. So I've invited our business reporter Rosa Saba on the podcast so she can tell us why 2022 is looking grim when it comes to food prices, what we should expect to pay more for next year, and she'll also share some tips for grocery shopping on a budget. Hi, Rosa. Good to have you again.
Thanks for having me.
So how much more are we expected to pay when we hit the grocery store?
So the latest food price report out of Dalhousie University actually makes it pretty easy for you to figure that out. They have sort of estimations based on, different family types and that kind of thing. But broadly speaking, if we're going to go with a family of 4, a man, a woman, and 2 kids, you could be seeing almost $1,000 increase in your annual food budget, up to almost $15,000. I think it's the biggest jump that this report has ever predicted, frankly.
Yeah, $1,000 is a lot and it all adds up as well. So what are the factors that are driving prices at these rates? Was it just the pandemic or has this been an otherwise bad patch, basically?
Yeah, so the pandemic for sure has caused, a lot of supply chain issues. That's been an issue throughout the pandemic as well. There's some difficulty hiring in the food sector, not just in restaurants, which we've talked about, but also sort of all along the food chain. Some people are blaming that on the pandemic. Others are saying it's people sort of realizing that they want perhaps a better job or something. There's some contention there, but regardless, there's definitely some difficulty hiring in the sector. And then, of course, climate change. So you only have to look to BC to see what a bad year it's been. And it's not just British Columbia that has had these difficulties. So climate change is making it increasingly difficult for a number of products. And because of that, and because of some other just general inflation, certain products are going up more than others. So that rise in inflation, in food inflation, which is supposed to be between, I think, 5 and 7%, is going to be higher for certain things than others.
And we also keep hearing about the global supply chain issue. Is that also one of the main reasons? Can you explain it a little bit, like how that's contributing to this?
Yeah, so I'm not a big supply chain person, but there's a sort of a variety of issues. Again, the pandemic has made it sort of harder to ship things, a shortage of workers. For example, there's a shortage of truck drivers, right? And that's how a lot of this food is getting around. There's also delays. So my colleague, Jacob Lawrence, wrote about how delays were causing a lot of problems for food wholesalers. And they're actually seeing a lot of food waste because of it, because some food was going bad. Of course, any sort of climate-related disasters making it difficult to bring things around. So it's really just a whole storm of different things all happening at once, or things that have been happening over a few years that are all culminating.
Mm-hmm. And is there a breakdown of this? You talked about an overall increase for a family of 4, let's say $1,000. Are there any variant factors here? Can you draw us a bit of a picture of like what this would look like for Canadians?
Yeah, so it really depends on what kinds of products you're buying. So for example, dairy prices are expected to increase quite a lot. So if you're a family that doesn't buy a lot of dairy, maybe you won't be affected as much, right? That's one example. And there's other products, like canola oil has gone up a lot, restaurant prices as well. So restaurant menu prices are expected to go up, again, sort of because of food prices, but also because of the hiring difficulties and some other things. So it really depends how much you eat out. It depends what you buy at the grocery store. It depends how old your kids are. It depends if you're pregnant. It depends what kind of household you have. There's all these different factors that go into it. And there's certainly things you can do to sort of lessen the impact on your household.
So, Rosa, you spoke about dairy as being one of those items that are affected. What other products are being affected more than others? I think you had a bit of a breakdown of the food forecasts that would impact us the most. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the total increase in food prices that's predicted by the report for 2022 is 5 to 7%, but there is a breakdown for certain categories. So dairy and then restaurant menu prices are both predicted to go up between 6 and 8%. That's what's driving the higher percentage. But also bakery is expected to go up 5 to 7%. There have been some difficulties, growing grain and that kind of thing. So that's going up. Fruit, 3 to 5%, vegetables, 5 to 7%, again, likely a mix of supply chain stuff and climate disasters. But luckily, meat and seafood are not expected to go up by much more than 2%. Now, meat actually went up by almost 10% in 2021. So it's not like it's going to be cheap or anything, but at least we can sort of rest assured knowing it's not going to go up anymore, knock on wood.
Right. And it's interesting, Rosa, that you mentioned how some of these prices have been going up for a while now. And you talk about how food inflation has been faster than regular inflation, not just because of the pandemic, but it's been happening for decades now. That's very interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about that? So this is not a new thing.
No, it's not a new thing. I mean, that is inflation, prices going up, right? But we do know, and I wrote about this in a separate piece, of course, that the prices of things like food and housing have gone up significantly more than regular inflation and certainly more than people's incomes have gone up. So that's the main problem here. If the cost of buying groceries goes up, that's fine as long as the amount of money I make per year goes up as well, right? But that's obviously not happening. I mean, even if you just look at minimum wage, how are people supposed to afford $1,000 increase in their family's grocery budget if minimum wage is not going up at the same pace? So that's really the major issue, is that some things are going up more than others. The input, the output, they don't match.
And I think one of the experts that you spoke to for your piece talked about it and described it as a perfect storm, right?
Yeah. So Michael Graydon, CEO of Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada, we were talking mostly about, manufacturing. And he was saying that the cost of manufacturing food products has been steadily rising. So labor costs going up. They are having some difficulties hiring. Transportation costs have gone up as well because gas has gone up, right? And then, of course, the cost of ingredients. And there have been some spikes. Canola, for example, that skyrocketed in price in 2021. So the price of oil went up. And he was saying that, when all of the input costs go up for the manufacturer, they can only absorb so much, right? And eventually prices do have to go up. So it all gets passed down the line when they can't absorb it anymore.
We'll be right back. And how are grocers, especially small businesses or independent grocers, how are they dealing with this? Because it's automatically assumed that the difference in these costs will pass directly to customers and we're going to end up paying for this. But that's not necessarily accurate, as you mentioned.
No, and I think that's a conception people have, first of all, that, something gets more expensive on the wholesale side, and then the grocers are going to take that and sort of apply it percentage by percentage to the customer. So they think, oh, if the price of canola goes up 20%, then the price of my bottle of canola is going to go up 20%. That's not necessarily the case. There are others who would say, well, that's how business works. And it is. But, grocers don't want people to have sticker shock. They don't want people to go to the grocery store and suddenly see the prices of things go up. So they look for ways to absorb the costs a little bit. They think, okay, right now we have, such and such margin on canola oil. Can we afford to have a smaller margin? You know what I mean? Essentially, can we afford to make less money on canola oil? And they'll sort of adjust certain prices over time, but it's not like a percentage for percentage thing because, again, they don't want people to have sticker shock. So it's not quite as simple as that.
So this is going to be challenging for groceries as well, particularly the small businesses, right? As they take a lot of this hit on their own selves too.
Particularly small ones for sure, because also small stores don't have the purchasing power that larger ones do. So they may be already paying higher prices. I spoke to Fiesta Farms, which is an independent grocer in Toronto, and they are going to try to look at their margins and take things slowly. But at the end of the day, it's a business and they have to run it like a business, right?
Yeah, it's a tough situation to be in. So we've talked about a number of factors. Is there anything that I'm missing? Any factors that might make things worse in future when it comes to food prices and inflation?
One factor I think that is really worth talking about is that labor force question. So I've written about this a lot over the pandemic. Some call it a labor shortage, others call it a shortage of good jobs. But generally speaking, overall employment in Canada has reached pre-pandemic levels, which is a good thing. And yet in the food industry, restaurant, manufacturing, et cetera, they are still short workers. And so I think we're going to continue to see that not only affect prices, but also it could affect what the jobs in those industries actually look like, as they try to attract workers. And again, it's obviously a positive thing if people start making more money or having more benefits, but that also costs the business more, and that could also impact food prices. So it'll be really interesting to see where that goes in the new year. And also climate change and natural disasters, like that's only going to have more of an impact. When this story came out, obviously I got some emails from people saying that that was all propaganda, but it's not. My home province has been flooding and on fire intermittently for like 3 years now, and that's just one province. So I think that that's absolutely something that's going to continue to have an impact.
Yeah, I think the visible impact of that would be quite difficult to deny at this point. So let's talk about implications. What are we looking at if the rates continue to hike in this way? What would be the consequences of this?
Well, as with anything, the people who are going to feel this the most are people who are low income, people who are making minimum wage. Statistically speaking, a lot of perhaps newer immigrants, a lot of racialized communities, single parent households. I mean, anyone who is already struggling in any way is going to have trouble with this. Because again, $1,000 is a lot of money, And so I think we're probably going to see more reliance on food banks, quite frankly. That's something that you're going to see more and more demand for. And then people are going to look for ways to save money at the grocery store as well. So we could see more interest in the brands like PC and Compliments, the brands that are sort of slightly cheaper and that are made by the grocery store. Earlier in the year, I actually, wrote about this, another report by Dalhousie saying that people might be more interested in brands like PC and Compliments. So the brands that are actually made by the grocery stores that are slightly cheaper. So we'll see more interest in that. Maybe more interest in, the buy tonight, enjoy tonight meat products. We could even see more people interested in sort of buying less meat, less dairy, going more plant-based. Not that plant-based is always cheaper, but it can be. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. But yeah, this is going to cause a lot of food insecurity. It's going to exacerbate food insecurity that already exists. And we should expect to see the effects of that in our most vulnerable populations.
Yeah, unfortunately, the same populations that were impacted disproportionately by the pandemic itself. So that story repeats itself again. So what can we do about this, if anything? Any tips for someone who might be trying to shop on a budget? You did talk about those special products or, that special brands that people can look to save.
Yeah, so my colleague Jacob Lawrence wrote about this recently. There's a bunch of different things you can do. As I mentioned, you can turn to alternative products. Now, some of the more sort of processed plant-based products can actually be just as expensive, but things like lentils and chickpeas, which have protein and other things in them that you're often looking to get when you're looking for a meat replacement, those are quite cheap. So you can try looking at things like that. One of the experts in his piece said that you can actually try buying in bulk. So if you can afford to do that, again, that's not something that everyone can do. Not everyone has a Costco membership. Not everyone has a car. But if you can, if you have a friend with a Costco membership, go with them. I actually do that. We like to go to Costco and buy a bunch of fish and meat and freeze it. So that's a really good way of sort of saving money. Big box stores like Walmart, Costco, they often have cheaper options. Obviously, I always like to support local, but at the end of the day, going to a No Frills or a Freshco, that's going to help you save some money as well. And there is a growing interest in all those alternative proteins that cost less, like chickpeas, lentils, and that kind of thing. There's also even some startups that are trying to address this. So there's one called Remarkable Reject. It's a GTA-based business that offers discounted vegetables that grocery stores won't accept. There's a lot of food at grocery stores that go to waste simply because of what it looks like or something like that. So that's a way to sort of help that cause and also save some money. And of course, budgeting, meal planning, not buying things that you don't need, and have a good meal before you go to the grocery store, or you'll end up like me coming home with a bunch of things that were not on your list. So yeah, that, and of course the usual coupons, buying grocery store brands, looking for reduced products. It takes a bit of work. It takes a bit of planning, but it's not impossible.
Right. Like you, I think I felt a bit attacked. I'm like, I don't do any planning. I think that would definitely go a long way. And from what you're saying, we might see some changes in like how we view food and our eating trends as well.
Yeah, I think that also, and this is something that Sylvain Charlebois, the lead author of the report, said, that food is perhaps becoming more culturally important to some people. We've been doing a lot more cooking at home, so that's part of it. But also, when you spend more money on something, you start thinking about where you're putting your money. So those who can afford to make these decisions might be thinking more about buying local. They might actually be spending more money by choice because they've decided, like food is such a big part of my budget. I'm going to really put my money where I believe. So that's something else that we could see sort of in the group of people who can afford to make those decisions. But for others, I think it's going to be a lot of budgeting, a lot of meal planning, and sort of looking for alternatives.
That makes sense. All right. Thank you so much, Rosa. As usual, you've been very insightful and informative for us.
Thank you for having me.
I was talking to the Star's business reporter, Rosa Saba. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Saba Itazaz. The This Matters team is Brian Bradley, JP Fozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bucknick, Raju Mudhar, and Sean Pattenton. Our music is by So-Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Pattenton. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribing matters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.